Hello everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled Optimizing Siebel CTMS with Electronic Trip Reports, presented by Perficient's Param Singh, Director of Clinical Trial Management Solutions. My name is Eugene Stefanov. I am the Marketing Manager for Perficient's Life Sciences practice. And before I turn it over to Param, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature located on the left side of your screen. Please state your questions clearly and keep in mind other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Nonetheless, your questions to the speaker will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information about our services, feel free to use the contact information on the various slides throughout the presentation. You can also fill out the contact form on the Life Sciences section of Perficient's website. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within several days. A link to the PDF version of the presentation will also be included. This concludes our housekeeping items. I would now like to turn the call over to Param Singh.
Thank you, Eugene. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's Perficient Life Sciences CTMS webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing how to optimize your Siebel CTMS application with a full electronic trip reports. So this webinar is really designed to explore the various benefits of utilizing a CTMS system with an electronic trip report, including a fully 21 CFR Part 11 compliant e-signature feature that can optimize your trip report review and approval process. So let me start with just introducing myself. My name is Param Singh, and I am the Director of the Clinical Trial Management Solution practice within Perficient's Life Science Business Unit. I've been working within the industry since 1999, and during that time have almost exclusively been working with the Siebel clinical product. I've been with Perficient Life Sciences Business Unit for over 6 years, including my time at Biopharm prior to Perficient. And before that, I was part of Accenture's pharma R&D practice and leading Siebel CTMS implementations there as well. So overall, I've been part of over 30 implementations or so of Siebel CTMS, and these vary from implementations from pharma, CROs, medical device, and academic institutions. And they vary from anywhere from 30 users, or actually even smaller than that, to global implementations of 4,500 users. So each type and size of these organizations that implement these systems have their own approach in sort of implementing the solution. So let me start with an introduction to our company. For those of you who might not know, Perficient is a large global information technology consulting organization. And actually we serve clients mainly through North America and Europe. And really our strategy and goal is to help provide business and technology solutions for companies to be able to be more efficient in what they do on a daily basis. So, one of our primary goals is to work with you not only to deliver solutions, but also really to become a long-term partner. We don't want to necessarily implement a solution and implement something and walk away. We want to continue to be there to help provide solutions for you that might help you meet your business needs. So Perficient was founded in 1997. Again, you'll see that we have many offices throughout the U.S. We also have some global offshore resources in different countries as well. We have a pretty sizable workforce in which resources are aligned to specific technologies or industries and have established themselves as respected thought leaders in the area of their expertise. Again, as you can see here, again, repeat business is one of our main things that we'd like to strive for, that we'd like to talk about, because again, we want to build these partnerships with organizations. And this slide here just shows some of the areas of focus that we have across our global consulting organization, where we bring expertise around the various business solutions and technology solutions that we bring to our clients. So a little bit about the life sciences business unit at Perficient, and a lot of you probably already know the name Biopharm Systems, and you've heard it in life sciences. So we were acquired by Perficient on April 1st of this year, and now we are the life science business unit within the Perficient industry groups. And our team of experts has remained completely intact since the acquisition. So our services and our offerings are all still the same across the life sciences arena. And we still have 4 distinct practices or focus areas within our business unit. So I lead the clinical trial management solution practice, where we focus on CTMS and our Ascend accelerator solution and mobile CRA. And we also have a clinical data management practice, clinical safety and pharmacovigilance, and a clinical data warehousing practice as well. And that they focus on their own set of products, applications, services, and offerings. And so with each of our practices, we offer the same level of industry and technology expertise as we always have in implementing and hosting the various applications that we've supported. And so I'd like to just wrap up introductions here just by taking a minute to talk about the CTMS practice and our team, and to explain a little bit more about what we do. We provide a variety of services and products related to CTMS. We manage implementations of Siebel Clinical, whether those are custom implementations or an implementation of our Siebel Clinical Accelerator, Ascend. And also, if you've seen some of our previous webinars, you know that we do extensive work with integrations in and out of Siebel Clinical and related systems. Our approach to implementation is very process-focused, and we also provide, sort of separately, we also provide our process consulting services to help organizations define and harmonize their SOPs and business processes across their organization with respect to clinical trial management. And we also offer comprehensive training services and products related to, again, Siebel Clinical and our Ascend solution. So that's just a glimpse of some of the services and products that we offer in the space. And again, for more information, please feel free to visit our website or contact us directly. So with that, wrapping up introductions, I'd like to go over today's agenda. We're going to start with a brief look at, at the components of a typical site visit report, which we call trip reports is the terminology within Siebel. And then we'll look at 4 common challenges associated with completing trip reports electronically. And then for each of those challenges, we're going to discuss some of the ways that in which Siebel Clinical, either vanilla, out of the box, or our Ascend accelerator version of Siebel Clinical, how those systems and those configurations address some of the challenges that we'll go over. And then the majority, I think, of today's webinar, we're going to go into a live demonstration of some of those features and completing and approving that electronic trip report in our Ascend accelerator configuration, which will include the electronic signature capability for submission and approval of the trip report. So we're actually going to go into a live demonstration of the system, and again, we're going to be looking at the latest version of Siebel and with our Ascend accelerator configurations on top of that. So before we get started, I did want to point out, just remind everyone that everyone is on mute. So if you do have an issue, please just use the chat feature to bring that to our attention. And also, if you have any questions along the way that you'd like us to address at the Q&A session that's going to be after our demonstration, please also submit those in the chat function or the chat window on your screen at any time during the presentation, and those questions will come directly to me, and I can answer them at the end. And I also want to remind everyone that we are recording the presentation and we're going to post it on the website afterwards. So with that, we'll get started. So the first thing we're going to go over is just, typical trip report components. Now, for your organization, you may have, sort of different types of trip reports that are set up. But what I wanted to go over is typically what we've seen in implementing CTMS. What are some of the typical components of the trip report that we've seen in our experience? So at the very top, we have our site visit information. So just high-level information about the site visit itself, when it was started, when it was completed, what the status was, some basic information about, of the site visit itself. And then we have our checklist items, a list of items that are typically in like a monitoring SOP, for example, that you'll have the monitor sort of check off that these things have occurred during the site visit. We have our narrative questions, so questions that require some sort of narrative response. And then we have our follow-up items, so any sort of action items that have come out of that site visit or open items that were sort of open that were, again, followed up on during that site visit. So those four pieces are typically part of any trip report, whether it's initiation, qualification, monitoring, or closeout. The next piece is the additional pieces for monitoring visits. You'll have things like enrollment statistics, so current enrollment statistics at the site. Potentially you'll have serious adverse events that you're monitoring, protocol deviations, and monitored case report forms. So those pieces typically come into play when we actually start the monitoring after, routine monitoring after you start enrolling patients within the study. So let's look at each of these in a little bit more detail. So for site visit information, these are basic facts that need to be captured in each trip report. Really the background details about the site visit. So again, high-level information about the site, the type of visit, the visit start and end dates, the status, and who was actually present at that visit. So, this is really just the high-level information about the actual site visit itself. The next is the checklist items. So again, these are tasks that need to be done or checked during the visit that can typically be answered with like a yes or no or not applicable. So really just going through a checklist of things that were done and making sure that everything was addressed. So some of the examples here of checklist items are whether the site staff training records are current, the site regulatory binder is complete, and informed consent is countersigned and dated. So really just going through a checklist of exactly what they need to do on that monitoring visit and marking it in that checklist item. So as part of, when we're talking about it either on paper or electronically, a checklist also might have some additional comments that are warranted. So if you're going through and saying, yes to each of those items and you come across a no, your business process could dictate that if I select no, that this was not done, that the monitor is required to sort of enter comments. So you can systematically do that as well through some configuration in the system, but your business process could dictate that as well. And then there are open-ended questions. So those questions or items that, again, are required to be done or performed during a site visit, but that requires sort of a narrative response beyond just a simple yes or no. So again, here are some examples. So open-ended questions of, how would you describe the site's compliance with the informed consent policy? How would you describe site compliance with drug accountability procedures? So really requires the monitor to enter some detailed assessments against each of those questions. So it's not simply just a yes or no. Next, we have our follow-up items. So these are the actions that a site must take, usually due to a finding during the site visit, but not always. I mean, you could also identify follow-up items even over the phone or prior to a site visit. But essentially, it's something that we want to be able to track that requires some sort of follow-up on the site side, and that we're going to keep sort of rolling over on each subsequent site visit to be able to make sure that those items are then complete. So again, examples are if sub-I requires training in product handling. So if there's staff training that needs to be done that hasn't been completed yet, we would mark that as a follow-up item that, again, the next site visit, we would confirm that those things have been completed. So again, you can read some of the other examples on here, but really just to track action items that have been either identified or are continuing to be monitored on these site visits. So additionally, for monitoring visits, you're going to need to track potentially you're going to need to track these additional items. So enrollment statistics. The current enrollment stats of how many subjects are screened, how many enrolled, how many are active, how many are early terminated at the time of that site visit. What is the current state of that site? You are potentially going to be tracking serious adverse events or adverse events, again, at the time of the visit. Same thing with protocol deviations. What is our running log of protocol deviations or violations that have occurred on the site, and then the case report forms that have been monitored during that visit as well. So again, not all of these may apply to every organization, but these are, again, typically what we see being sort of tracked on trip reports from a monitoring perspective. So what are some of the challenges that we see with trip reports, specifically when we're talking about trip reports within a system, right? So the first one is adhere to site visit SOPs. So again, how do we ensure within a system that if we have a specific monitoring SOPs established at our organization, how do we have everyone sort of adhere to that and ensure that they're in compliance with those SOPs, and if they're not, how do we identify where they went out of compliance? Capture a snapshot in time for when the site visit occurred. So, when we're talking about, again, electronic trip reports, we're talking about pulling data from what's being tracked for that particular site. So how do we ensure that when we're talking about a trip report, that we can actually take a snapshot in time for things like enrollment and follow-up issues and other items, so we can look back on that electronic record, months from now and see, okay, as of July 30th, this was what the state of the site was in terms of enrollment, in terms of deviations, SAEs, etc. And how do we track the report through the review and approval process? Can we essentially do the full review and approval submission directly in the system? And then how do we record compliant approval? So having that review process and facilitating communication back and forth, and then ultimately recording the actual approval and signatures electronically. So those are some of the challenges that we've our clients have been met with, and we've been met with when we're talking about sort of fully electronic realization of this entire process. So how do we address some of those challenges? So the first one, adherence to SOPs. The Siebel Clinical addresses the challenge of ensuring trip reports adhere to their governing SOPs through template functionality. So a template is essentially like an outline that allows you to create a sort of blank form that monitors can fill out each time they visit a site. So again, it's almost like enabling and embedding your SOPs, your full checklist of items that need to happen on every trip report, when monitoring trip report, all of that can be enabled as a template. So when you create a new monitoring report, the template will mirror that SOP and apply it to each trip report. So then the monitor can actually go in electronically and mark off, the checklist, etc. So this functionality really ensures that you can adhere to those SOPs and consistently do monitoring in a standard manner. And the great thing about that is the templates are also administered in the system. So as your SOPs change, if an SOP changes, you're not actually having to change your process, or if your organization grows and you have a different monitoring process in a different geography, for example, all you would need to do is just create a template specific to that geography. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility in that it's driven by an administrative feature, but also again ensures compliance across your operating procedures. So to demonstrate how a trip report template can be set up to mirror an SOP, here is a portion of a sample monitoring visit SOP. This portion shows two sections, one about regulatory binders and one about a study product. And let's see what these line items look like in a trip report template. So this is a sample. So in this example, each of the lines from that SOP that we looked at earlier relating to, let's say, regulatory binders have been converted into your checklist item, meaning that they can be answered with, again, a yes, no, or not applicable, or some sort of drop-down. And the section of the SOP that was about study product has been converted into open-ended questions. So you can see that the questions that we looked at, how would you describe the storage space and conditions of the study product, adequate or secure? That's an open-ended question. So that's actually a question, not a checklist item. So this is how the Siebel application can actually convert, directly from your SOPs into these specific templates. So once that template is in the system, this can be applied multiple times to every site visit that's needed to be filled out from a monitoring perspective. So during the demo, we'll actually look at some of that and how to use that template to complete the trip report. So we're going to actually look at that live, but I thought it'd be good to look at one particular example of how do we translate that and how we help our clients translate their SOPs directly into these templates. Another common challenge associated with a trip report is the need to have the report reflect a snapshot in time. So this is easy to do with paper reports because it becomes because you're filling out the paper once and you're submitting it essentially. But it becomes a lot trickier with electronic reports because you're using data that's constantly being updated. So your enrollment statistics are currently constantly being updated. So how do we take a snapshot to be included in our trip reports? So somehow you need to record and track even the status of, say, follow-up items or protocol deviations without needing to recreate them for each new trip report. So in Ascend, in our accelerator, we've created these areas outside of the trip report where you can track things like follow-up items, protocol deviations, SAEs, CRF monitoring. And then within the trip report, there's a way to actually import the read-only copies of those records. So again, we're going to look at how that's going to work directly in our demo. But essentially, what's needed to happen is we need to pull in and make copies of the records and copies of enrollment statistics, and then embed them directly in the trip report so they remain static while the rest of the data that you're tracking actually continues to be updated. So again, we'll show you exactly how that works in just a couple of minutes in our demo. Another common challenge is the need to track the trip report as it moves through its review process. So again, with paper reports, it's easy to walk the report around from desk to desk for review. But we need to configure the system so it can actually do that electronically. So if we have an electronic trip report, we can actually we need to figure out a workflow that's going to facilitate that communication back and forth, that review process back and forth between the submitter and the reviewer. So one of the things that Siebel CTMS has out of the box is this trip report status field, which is governed by a state model. So it controls the order of status changes and which user can make which changes in the system. So you can actually dictate based on different users, different user types, who can actually change the status from trip report in progress to submitted versus submitted to rejected or approved. So the Siebel system out of the box sort of does that. In our accelerator, in Ascend, we've sort of taken that process a little further and put in full electronic signature capabilities with re-authentication. So every time that you submit a trip report or approve a trip report, we want to capture an electronic signature, so we re-authenticate the user. And we also have a complete visible audit trail. So when we submit, reject, all the different types of status changes that happen, and any number of rejections that may have occurred, all of those will be captured in the visible audit trail. So that's something that, again, we'll look at in a couple of minutes. But essentially, the Siebel application allows us to have that complete review back and forth review directly in the system. So there's no need to print out an actual report or email an actual report and do that review process. We can actually do it directly in the system itself. And the last, so the biggest challenge is related to that review process is, the biggest challenge that we've seen is when it comes to electronic trip reports is how to ensure compliant, sort of approvals of those trip reports. And there's three primary ways of approving a trip report, and each with varying degrees of compliance risk. So the first one, which is the most, I guess, conservative, is ink signatures. So while you can still do the review and approval or review process and finalize that trip report directly in the system, some organizations choose to go down the very conservative route of we're still needing to print that report once it's final and then have wet ink signatures on those printed reports and then file them away. The next conservative is the full-on re-authentication of the user. So capturing a fully re-authenticated electronic signature upon submission and approval in the system, and having that in an audit trail as well. And that's something that we're going to look at. That's what we've built our Ascend accelerator on. And then the last one is the visible audit trail. So it's still following that same review and approval process, but the only thing it doesn't have is that re-authentication piece, or the user having to log in, username and password each time that they're actually signing the document. But we're still controlling who gets to change the status from submitted to approved within the system controls, and all we're capturing is the visible audit trail. So those two are similar in nature. The re-authentication method, of course, captures the username and password so each time, so it ensures that the correct user is essentially signing the trip report. So again, we'll in the demo we're going to show you that full re-authentication piece, the full electronic signature piece around the submission and approval of the trip report. So that's all of the slides that we have today, just around looking at this whole electronic trip report topic. So we're going to go into the demo, and we're going to spend a decent amount in the demo just to go through all of what we've covered around what the system can do for us. So let me share my desktop here. Okay. So what we're going to go through is essentially creating a new trip report, going through the actions of completing it, going through the actions of submitting it, and then I'll log out of the system and log back in as a different user and approve or reject the trip report. And we'll sort of go back and forth just a little bit just to sort of facilitate that that review and approval process and how that's going to work. So let's jump into, we're going to jump into site management. And again, for those of you that are not familiar with the latest version of Siebel, this is what we're looking at right now, is the latest version of the Siebel clinical application with our Ascend configuration on top of it. So those of you that have seen Siebel clinical out of the box, what you're going to see today, or some of the features that you're going to see today, are a little bit different since we've enhanced the system in our accelerator. So I'm just going to go into one of our sites here. Let me open this up so we can. So before we go into our actual trip report, I want to show you how we're tracking the information that's actually going to be fed into our monitoring trip report. So the first piece that we're going to look at, we'll go into follow-up items first. So we mentioned that follow-up items is the typical, inclusion into our trip report. So what we have here is a running list of follow-up issues that we've tracked for this particular site. And you can see that some of them are open, some of them are closed. We have a different categorization available, so you can have different follow-up issues, and you can categorize them in a different way. And whether it's a documentation issue, it's a training issue, personnel, facility, etc. So you're actually putting in these issues. We're putting in the status, so if it's open, you can see when they're open, when they're closed, due dates, completed dates, who it's assigned to. And then we also have this checkbox of selected for a trip report. Now, by default, we'll see this when we go into the trip report, by default, all open items, if an item is opened today on this site visit and it remains open over the next 2 site visits, that item is always going to be pulled in automatically into the trip report. So we have this feature of sort of carryover where that issue will carry over from each site visit report to the next. When you've closed that trip report, to include it, let's say I've closed a particular a follow-up issue today. Once I mark it as closed, I would select it for the trip report. So any closed items that is closed since the last site visit, for example, and we want to include it in this site visit report that it got closed, we would select it for the trip report, and then ultimately it'll get pulled in. So let's look at protocol deviations. So we have our follow-up items. Now we're looking at protocol deviations. So this is a way for us to track our protocol deviations. So again, we have a type of protocol deviation. So whether it's ConMeds, eligibility, informed consent, visit window, study device, drug deviation. So different basic categorizations of deviations or violations that are potentially occurring at this particular site. You can put in a description, initial occurrence date identified by monitor site. If it's a subject-specific deviation or violation, like a visit window violation, you can actually select and associate it to a particular subject and put in some actions required or resolutions if we've sort of had those details for this particular deviation. Next, we'll look at adverse events. So here we have a listing of adverse events or serious adverse events that we're monitoring or that we're sort of managing at the site level. So whether they're adverse events or serious adverse events, we can associate them to a subject. We can put in an event name, and then just high-level information about that particular adverse event, just from a monitoring perspective, right? It's not meant to be obviously a safety system. We're just sort of capturing high-level details about the serious adverse events that we're monitoring for this particular site. And the last piece that we'll look at is Crf tracking. So here we have a listing of all of our planned visits, planned number of CRF pages, and then I'm going to, as a user in the system, I'm going to enter in details of the CRF page details, of which pages were collected, which ones were missing, which source verified, what's retrieved dates, etc., any additional comments. So, with each of these things that we looked at outside of follow-up items, so CRF tracking, protocol deviations, adverse events, those can be automated, right, to become, they can come into the system automatically through an EDC or a data management integration as well, and we've done that before. But you sort of basically see the setup in the system where you can actually see this information outside of the trip report, right? Typically, in vanilla implementations of Siebel Clinical and others, we see some of this information sort of embedded directly in the trip report, and that's the only place to see that, like follow-up items, for example. So what we've done differently is we have all of those pieces as part of site management, so follow-up issues, CRF tracking, adverse events, protocol deviations, but they're also going to be a component in our actual site visit report. But we're going to manage, these are sort of living records that you're going to continue to manage and update versus in the trip report, they're going to be static records. So now I'm going to go into my site visits area, and what I'm going to do is actually just create a brand new site visit report and brand new site visit. So I'm going to do it, webinar test 2. And I'm going to make it a site monitoring visit, since all of those components are going to be inherently a part of a site monitoring visit, whereas they wouldn't necessarily be a part of that for an initiation or a qualification visit. So I'm going to go into the plan visit start hyperlink here, and it's going to give me a sort of a blank canvas for my actual electronic trip report. So this is the fully electronic trip report that's in the system, and we'll sort of go through the actions of creating it. So I'm going to put in our site visit details. This is the highest component that we talked about. So let's say the visit started today and it ended today. It was a single day visit. As soon as I enter that information, you'll notice that our current enrollment statistics are blank right now, but as soon as I enter this date in, the system is automatically going to calculate and take a snapshot of what is our current enrollment statistics of subjects across each of these statuses. So how many do we have screened, enrolled, total completed, active, early terminated, etc. So this is again a snapshot that's happening as soon as that visit completed comes in. So even 6 months from now, when we've enrolled many more patients, if I come back to this electronic record, it'll show me that as of July 31st, 2014, we only had 21 enrolled, 8 completed, 9 active, etc. So next, I'm going to actually show you what the template functionality looks like. So we're going to apply our, again, embedded SOP, monitoring SOP in the form of a template. So I'm going to look at this demo site monitoring template and click OK. And this is going to apply all of our checklist items directly to the system and our questions as well. So these two areas were blank when we came in here, and now it has all of our questions and and checklist items directly in the application. So now that's where the adherence to SOPs comes in. So it takes the guesswork out of what I need to do just by applying that template. So I'm just going to go through the motion of putting in our answers for each of these questions here. So again, I can type them in. I can choose from a drop-down essentially and just go through that. And let's just going to go through this really quickly here. And on the last question, so you can have a process, like I said, if you have a business process to say if anything is answered as no, we're going to put in some additional comment. So same thing, you would sort of go through that. And then down here, these are the narrative questions. And this one, I'm going to put in a narrative response. So it requires additional detail. So I'm just going to say that the storage is adequate. Obviously, you would put in a little bit more detail, but I'm just going to sort of put in a response like that. So the next piece I come on to is our monitored follow-up items. And again, there's not, everything is blank here. All I simply have to do is I've already managed this site, so I just import everything that's relevant. So again, it's going to pull in anything that's still open, right? So anything that's not closed, essentially, will get pulled in here. And these are all read-only. I can't edit this information. This is just showing me what's currently going on at the site. What are the open items at the site, and what have been closed since the last site visit. So those are the ones that I've selected for the trip report, and automatically they get pulled in. If I go into import CRFs, I just click on that button, same thing. It will pull in all of the ones that I've selected for the trip report, so anything that I've monitored. Protocol deviations, it's going to pull in all of our running list of cumulative protocol deviations at the site. And then SAEs, you'll remember we had 2 SAEs and 1 AE, so this is designed to just pull in our serious adverse events. So both of those came in. And so now I'm ready to submit this trip report. So you'll notice that I have a submit button here, but before I can do that, I actually have to assign a reviewer to the trip report. So just to, I have to define who's assigned to this trip report, or who is responsible for this one, and then who is actually going to be the reviewer. So before I can submit it, I have to have a reviewer. I'm going to pick somebody other than myself. If I choose myself, it's not going to let me submit a trip report directly to myself. So now I can submit it. And this is where the electronic signature comes into play. Are you sure you want to submit this trip report? I say yes, and it gives me some sort of legal warning around this is the equivalent of physically signing this document. And I say okay. And now I will enter in my username and password. And if I obviously don't enter the correct password, it's not going to let me. Sorry. Yeah. So as soon as I enter that in, it's going to automatically put the trip report status to submitted and put in the submitted date. So I can't approve my trip report because it's not the one that, one, I'm not listed as a reviewer. Even if I were, I wouldn't be able to approve my own submitted trip report. So there's some logic in place here that doesn't allow you to review and approve your own trip report. So I'm just going to log out real quick, and we'll log in as the reviewer. And on the home page itself, we have this concept of an inbox. So here's our, we have basically notifications. Anytime somebody submits a trip report or approves a trip report or rejects a trip report that you have an action pending, it's going to show up on your inbox. So now I submitted it to this admin, and now they get a notification in their inbox. I'm going to click on that notification, and it takes me directly to the trip report in question. So now I as a administrator or a reviewer, can now go through and review this trip report. And you'll notice that the import buttons are turned off. So once it's submitted, everything's sort of in a static mode, and the only thing that I can do is put in a reviewer comment against against things that I want updated. So for example, if I, let's see, so if I wanted some additional comments here and saying, this is not filled out, complete this, I can put in comment directly on checklist items or questions. And then if I want some reviewer comments on the entire trip report itself, so for example, I noticed that here in the question it says storage is adequate, but in my follow-up items I see that there's a open follow-up item saying the supplies are not kept in a proper facility. So that sort of conflicts with the checklist item. So I can put in some reviewer comments to say close appropriate follow-up issues. And I can reject this trip report. For rejection, it just gives me that warning. It doesn't require me to sign the trip report. So that signature is only required during an approval. So now if I log out and I come back in as myself, I should see a notification potentially of what I need to, that this trip report was rejected, and I can go in and actually make those updates. So here I see that Siebel Administrator has rejected my trip report, and it's telling me to rectify it. And I can click on it, and I'll go into the trip report, and I can update what's needed. So for updating this information, I can obviously update directly on the checklist items and the question. So if this needs to be filled out, I just fill that out directly. But the reviewer comment of close appropriate follow-up issues, these, like I mentioned, this is read-only right now because it's a snapshot, so I can't really do anything here. So what I have to do is just go to my site and update the management information for that site. So I go into my follow-up issues for the site, and I'm going to look at this and close that issue. I'm going to select it for the trip report. I'm going to put in some additional, I'm going to put in a comment to say updated comment. So now if I go back into my site visit, if you look at the, once we get in here, there we go. If you look at this follow-up items section, you'll notice that that record is still saying open and there's no comment. So the updates that I made are not in this record because this was a snapshot that was taken when I submitted the trip report the first time. So if I wanted to update this information, all I simply have to do is import, and you'll notice that now it shows closed, and there's my updated comment. So that's really to show you that this is truly a snapshot in time, so that, again, if I come back a year from now, it's going to show me exactly what the status was of that site at the time of this particular site visit once this gets finalized. So again, I can submit this trip report and go through those actions. And what I also want to show you, and we'll end the demo at this point, is the status audit trail. So there's a full-on approval history. So when I look at this particular trip report, I can see I can see a full status history of this particular trip report. So when I submitted it, when it was rejected, who was it rejected by, and then finally it was resubmitted. So if you have multiple iterations of submission, rejection, you can actually dive into the approval history to see why it took so long for that trip report to get approved, for example. So there's a lot of inherent features in the trip report that show your progress as an organization against your metrics around monitoring, your metrics around trip report review and approval, to the point of actually even seeing how many days it took for turnaround. So all of that has been built into the trip report functionality of our accelerator to help organizations sort of drive those metrics and see those metrics and do that sort of full review and approval directly in the system without needing to print the actual report. And what the report actually looks like, I just have it open here, is once it gets finalized and approved, and you need to potentially generate a PDF. This is what, and this is just a sample of what it can look like, right? So you have your site details at top, you have your current enrollment statistics, your list of attendees, your checklist questions, and you'll notice that the comments are in here, but not the reviewer comment. So your approval history, the approval signature section, this is still in here for wet signature, but you can actually remove it and have the system generate the equivalent of the electronic signature directly here based on the electronic signature that's in the system. And then it has all of your monitored items as well. So your follow-up issues, your monitored CRF, your protocol deviations log, and your serious adverse event log. So this is what what the trip report sort of printout, or the PDF once it's finalized, can look like. So with that, I will end the demo and we'll open it up. I think we have a few minutes here for some question and answers. So Eugene, I'll turn it over to you to moderate them.
Great, thank you. So before we begin to the Q&A session, I just want to remind everybody that you can ask your questions via the chat feature on the left-hand side, and we'll answer as many as we can get through. In the meantime, we have several questions that already came in. I'll start with the first one. Are the adverse events fed from the EDC, such as Inform, or are they captured here in this application?
Okay, great question. So for things like subject enrollment statistics, subject visits, completion, CRF, serious adverse events, protocol deviations, all of those pieces in the live demo today, they were entered in the system manually. But each of those items that I just mentioned, all of those objects are just as easily being able to be captured from an EDC system or a data management system. And it really depends on how that system is set up to be able to extract that information in sort of a standard manner across studies from those systems, from an EDC system. So we've been able to do it. For example, Oracle Clinical and RDC, we've been able to do that and capture all of that information automatically and feed that information into Siebel Clinical. So once that information is there, when you're talking about completing your trip report, you're importing that information that was automatically fed through that integration. So yes, all of that is possible, but it's also possible to just enter that information directly into Siebel. So it's really up to you whether you have a capability of sort of interfacing to your EDC system, and whether you have one system versus multiple. So that sort of increases the complexity a little bit. But ideally, you would want that information automatically entered from a source system that has it, rather than potentially manually entering it.
Great. The next question is, are there versions available to be used on iPad or Mac?
Yes. So for the latest version of Siebel Clinical, right? So whether you're talking about a vanilla implementation of Siebel Clinical 8.1.1.11, which is the new OpenUI version of Siebel Clinical, and what OpenUI really means is it's browser agnostic and system and device agnostic. So you can run the entire application as you saw it today on any browser within a sort of a Windows machine, right? Chrome, Firefox, IE 10 plus. You can also run the entire system on an iPhone, on an iPad, on your Mac, on Safari. So yes, the short answer is yes. That the system that you saw today, all of the functionality, all the capabilities can be run on any version of Apple devices, Android devices, as well as classic Windows machines. So everything is zero install. So you're just using a browser to access the entire application.
Okay, great, thank you. So that actually ends our Q&A session. We didn't have any more questions, so we're actually right on time. We'd like to thank you very much for joining today's webinar. As a reminder, the recording will be sent to you within the next few days for you to share with your colleagues. We have several upcoming webinars that you are welcome to register for. You can visit the Perficient website and view the upcoming ones that we have. If there are additional questions, feel free to email us. You can see the contact information on the screen right now. We thank you very much for your participation and hope that the information we provided you with today was helpful. Have a great rest of the day and evening.
Thanks, everyone.